So let me ask you this. Do you have customers that are interested in going to lower input programs? Have you heard people talking about, I don't want all these horrible pesticides on my yard, whether it's on the beds or whether it's on the lawn or whatever? Have you heard anybody say anything like that? People asking questions? All right, sure. I hear it a lot too. Homeowners asking me all the time, how can I go organic or how can I go green? Well, that's the kind of topic du jour, and it's a good topic. I mean, it's something that we should all be interested in because it should be important to all of us because of the environment. So we'll get into this stuff, dealing with healthy residential lawns. So making them as good as we possibly can using best management practices, or as few inputs as we possibly can get into. All right, so for those of you that are in the business dealing with landscapes, what about this question? Is there a market?
Yes.
For sure there is. So just a quick Google search, there is a bajillion lawn care companies out there that are offering either organic or sustainable or one of these buzz phrases to get better, healthier, less input turf. Even if you search Louisville low input lawns or Louisville organic lawns, there's a bunch that pop up for Louisville. And so there are companies that are already getting into this stuff in Louisville. So is there a market? Absolutely there's a market. People are making money off of going to lower, fewer inputs. All right, so if your company were to go to fewer inputs, reduced input lawn care, what's the issue? What would you gain or possibly lose? So the first one there, gain customers. Could you gain customers by going to having programs for organic or fewer inputs?
Yes.
Sure you could, no doubt about it. There are people that want that stuff. Could you lose customers?
Yes.
Why would you lose customers?
They don't get the results that they're used to.
Maybe that's what it comes down to. So I talked to one of the lawn care companies here in town that when they started off, offered totally organic. And by year 2, they had switched to synthetic. People aren't happy. They want the lawn that their neighbor has, and when they see the lawn that they get with organic inputs, they're not necessarily happy. And so maybe you do lose customers if you don't market this properly. What about environmental stewardship?
Yeah.
Are you going to gain? For sure. And that should be important to every one of us. And this is the thing you need to be selling. If you want to jump into this, and you should at least consider this, this is what you need to harp on. This is good for the environment. This is potentially safer for your children or pets or whatever. What about street credibility? If you go to reduced inputs or organic, trying to be more environmentally friendly, are you going to have more street credibility? And I list honesty and insecticides there. I know a lot of lawn care companies that will spray an insecticide during the middle of the summertime, whether the lawn needs it or not. They're making money off of it. And so if you can cut off that one application, yeah, you're not going to make the money off that application, but you can tell your customer, look, you just don't need it this year. That's street credibility. That's going to be word of mouth. This company is honest. They're not going to mess with you. This next one here is kind of, I guess there it is, laser kind of works this far. How good of a salesperson you are and how good of a turf manager you are. So selling this, you're going to have to tell the people, here's what you're going to expect. It may not be the perfect lawn. You may have to deal with a few weeds or whatever, but you're going to have to sell it based on the environmental stewardship side of it. Or the turf management side. You have to know that stuff inside and out. When are weeds going to germinate? When are bugs going to show up? When are diseases going to be potential? You have to know exactly what's going to happen in every part of the season so you can treat these things before they get out of hand. And so knowing your job is critical to do reduced input lawn care. I don't believe in karma, but I'll tell you what, it doesn't hurt. If you're doing good things, you know, even if good things don't come back to you, what's wrong with doing good things? Nothing, right? And so if there is such a thing as karma, why not even try to go down that road a little bit? All right, so our lawn care options. We've got synthetic. And this is probably what most of us are dealing with right now. We're throwing synthetic fertilizers at the lawn like urea. We're putting out pesticides. We have mono stands, so one kind of grass, whether it's Kentucky bluegrass or tall fescue or whatever, just one thing out there. And we're mowing often. And as lawn care companies, we like this because that's how we're making a lot of our money. The more we mowing, the more money that's going in our pocket. So that's usually what most companies in Kentucky are using. We then have our reduced input option, which is still getting fertilized. That's important for a good looking lawn. There are some pesticides used, not much though. We have mostly monostands, usually just one kind of grass, but there may be a couple other things mixed in there. And there's certainly less mowing because we're not putting out as much fertilizer. All right, and then our organic option, we're dealing with organic fertilizers. We don't have pesticides, or if we do have pesticides, they are organic pesticides. Has anybody messed with organic pesticides? Anybody? Nobody? Okay. I've done a little bit of work with them, and I can tell you they're not exactly awesome. So you pay a lot for them, and they don't give you a whole lot of results. And so that's one concern I have with going fully organic, is that some of the things that we want to control in a yard, we don't have good options to control it with. And certainly because we're not using hardly any fertilizer on an organic lawn, we're not going to be mowing a whole lot. All right, so here's our synthetic lawn. What do you like about this picture? What's nice about that lawn? It's dark green. We like dark green, right? What else? It's striped up pretty. We got the checkerboard even on that one. And that impresses the pants off of people. My goodness, it does. And it's so simple to do. What else do we like about that? It's full, it's uniform, there's no weeds in there, you don't see a bunch of dandelions. This is just what people consider the perfect lawn. That beautiful house in the background doesn't hurt either, but this is what people want to see. And when you come to their yard or come to their house and say, you know, I want to sell you a program, this is what they've got in their mind. So the bad thing about this is most of the time with most companies you're just on a schedule. There's no thought going into it whatsoever. You're just, okay, today is May 1st, this is what I'm doing. Whether the lawn needs it or not, this is what's happening. The nice thing about it though is this last one here. So if we're using fertilizers and we're using pesticides, eventually we're going to get a lawn that looks very much like this. And so if we've got a good thick lawn, what does that mean for us? What's not going to come up in that thick lawn because of competition? Weeds, for sure. And so that's one good thing. We may be, with this situation, be able to use less herbicides down the road if we've got that good thick lawn. All right, the reduced input. We're still going to have a good looking lawn in this situation. It may not be perfect and glowing green like the last one, but it's going to be attractive. You can see I've got a few things, maybe not fully a monostand there, maybe some clover in there, something like that, I don't know. But we've got this environmentally friendly approach. We're not using as much fertilizer, we're not using as much pesticide. Some people want that, no doubt about it. So if you can tell them, look, here's what you're going to expect. You can expect not perfect lawn, but it'll be still an attractive green space that you can have your kids run on and whatever. That can work. But another thing is, because you're not doing as much work on this lawn, you may be able to price this lower. And so that may pick up some customers because this isn't as expensive as the full service package. And so there's two ways to market that, which is not a bad thing. So again, we're still using fertilizers, we're still using some pesticides here. We can still get that good thick lawn, which is going to lead to less pesticide down the road. So again, this reduced input approach, and this is what I'm really pushing, is this reduced input. Doing things properly, just with less of it. All right, and the organic approach, I mean, this is really what it comes down to, saving the world. We're not doing anything bad. We're putting organic fertilizer out. We're not using pesticides. It's probably not going to be a great looking lawn, but it's not going to be hurting the environment. The only thing that's probably going to be bad is the mowing, where we're putting out emissions. But we're usually talking, because these products cost a lot more than the synthetic options, we're talking more money for the organic program. And that's something that people find hard to swallow. My lawn looks worse and I'm paying more for it. You know, wait a second, something's not right here. So that's another thing. You're going to have to sell this. If people want organic, by gosh, give them organic. But make sure they understand what they're in for. All right, so let's get into best management practices. This is going again with the reduced input approach, but this is just doing things smartly and how they should be done. So BMPs, best management practices. So we're doing these things before we ever deal with a lawn, maybe during construction of a lawn, and then during the management of the lawn. So what do we got here in this image?
Repairing border.
Okay, riparian strip. There we got this big grown up area between the turf and the pond. Why do we have that?
I don't have to weed eat it.
You don't have to weed eat it. That's exactly right. It's all about emissions. No.
Erosion control.
You don't have to weed eat it, which is a good thing, I can promise you. But erosion control, sure. I hate weed whacking. By gosh, I hate it. What's that?
Wildlife.
Wildlife, okay.
Prevent runoff.
Prevent runoff, for sure. That's very important. And that's pretty much the big reason for these things. Stop chemicals from moving down into the creek or the pond or whatever. What's the other nice thing about that? We have the turf stopping 10 feet away or whatever it is from the water's edge. Okay, safety, so you're not getting equipment close to it. What about when you're slinging fertilizer? If you got lawn all the way down to the edge, you're probably going to be slinging a little bit of fertilizer into the pond. But with this, there's no reason whatsoever to be fertilizing this, and so your fertilizer, your spreader, you're going to try and aim for here. Or if you're spraying, again, you're not going to have your boom hanging off over into the water. And so these things are important for a lot of reasons, but that's just a best management practice. We're going to reduce putting bad things into that pond because of this little strip. All right, there's a bunch of goals here, 5 goals for BMPs. We're just going to focus on that second one there. Reduce total chemical use through IPM. And I know you've all heard of IPM before. It's probably been beat into your head at meetings like this. But we'll go through it really quickly with turf today. So IPM, Integrated Pest Management. So a few objectives with it. We want healthy turf. You've heard me say that before. We want healthy turf that's going to withstand pest pressure. That's the critical thing with it. We're going to use some chemicals. IPM doesn't mean we're going organic or anything. It just means we're using things smartly. We may get into these other things, getting beneficial organisms in there like birds or other insects that will eat bad insects. And then the last one there is certainly important. When pests show up, hitting them when they're vulnerable. And when are pests vulnerable? When they're babies, when they're young. For sure. The smaller they are, the easier they are to control, whether it's weeds, diseases, or insects. All right, so 6 approaches to IPM. We'll touch on a few of these here today: genetic, regulatory, cultural, physical, biological, and chemical. Start off with genetic. So if you have the possibility to actually start the lawn, you're growing it in, you're planting the grass, the genetic approach is just choosing the right grass. What's the right grass for us in the Louisville area for a lawn? Fescue. All right, that's fairly pretty obvious. I think it's probably been, you've probably heard it a million times that tall fescue is the way to go. But are there better fescue cultivars than others? Okay, so what would you look for? If you've got 2 fescue cultivars that look exactly the same, what's one thing you might look for in one of these cultivars that would be attractive to put on a yard?
Doesn't grow as tall.
What's that?
Doesn't grow as tall.
You don't have to mow it as much. So that's good for a homeowner, maybe not so good for a lawn care company, but certainly that's something that I would consider. What else though? Thinking about pests.
The origin, where it came from.
Okay, where it came from. So is it adapted to our climate? Most tall fescues are. But there are tall fescue cultivars that have better brown patch tolerance than others. And so if you don't get as much brown patch on a lawn as you would with another tall fescue, why not plant that one? Or if you don't have as bad insect pressure with one cultivar over another, why not plant that one? And so if you ever want to look at the tall fescues that are available today, you can go to a website called www.ntep.org, and you can click on tall fescue and you can find out everything you need to know about which cultivar is the best for Kentucky. We've got them all over there in Lexington. And they're rated across the country for things like how they look, but then disease tolerance, things like that. And so you can find out the biggest and the best by going to that webpage, www.ntep.org. So that's genetic, choosing the right grass to begin with. Regulatory then is just buying good material. Blue tags. You see that blue tag? You know you're getting, by law, good stuff. Whatever says on that label is what's in that bag. So less weed seed. We're getting only one kind of fescue, not in this situation, but with, if that's what we're looking for, just one kind, that's what it's going to be. And so using the regulatory approach, buying good material, not skimping on cheap seed is important. All right, so you've all heard of the transition zone before. The bad news for us is we're right smack dab in the middle of this transition zone. So north of us, we've got cool summers, cold winters. South of us, we've got hot summers, moderate winters. What do we have? We've got what? Well, exactly. It could be a totally, like, how gorgeous is it out there this morning? That's awesome. Feels like November. So we have hot summers typically, not so much this year, but typically we do, and we've got cold winters. And so that means our warm season grasses like Bermuda grass and zoysia grass don't do very well during the wintertime here because they don't have good cold tolerance. Our cool season grasses, because they don't have good heat tolerance, don't do very well during the summertime here. And so if we can't grow warm season grasses very well and we can't grow cool season grasses very well, what do we have left? This is pretty much the one place on the planet where we can grow all grasses equally poorly. Which is tough. It's tough. To be you guys is tough because you're tasked with keeping this looking good when it doesn't want to look good. So this transition zone makes it tough to grow grass. So our turf choices, because of this, are very limited. We've got in light orange, a bunch of grasses that you can buy, but you shouldn't. They just won't work. A bunch of warm season grasses that will die first winter. We've got some cool seasons. Creeping bentgrass you'll see on golf courses, but it does not work for lawns. Annual ryegrass is a horrible grass for lawns. Grows like crazy and it looks bad. The dark orange ones there, we've got Bermuda, zoysia, fine fescue, perennial rye, Kentucky blue. Why would I have reservations over Kentucky bluegrass? This is Kentucky. What's that?
Disease prone.
Okay, it's disease prone. When? What time of the year? In the hot summer, when it's stressed out. And so even though it's called Kentucky bluegrass, it's not really adapted to our climate. It does not have good heat tolerance. And so we have a lot of Kentucky bluegrass, and you can have a great looking Kentucky bluegrass lawn, but there's probably going to be more inputs on that Kentucky bluegrass lawn to keep it looking decent. So the only one that I've got on there recommended, as you guys mentioned, is tall fescue. This is a grass that has good cold tolerance and good heat tolerance, and so it makes it through our summers better than the other cool season grasses. The other thing you got to keep in mind on top of what grass works in our climate is what is the the certain situation for that yard. So how is the grass planned to be used? Is there a bunch of kids that are going to be running around on it? Is there dogs? What's going to be going on in that yard? Is there shade? Kentucky bluegrass will not grow in shade. And so our options become limited very quickly if we have certain situations. How much work do you want to do, or does the homeowner want to do? Some grasses will work you to death. I just moved up here last year from Mississippi and I had a Bermuda grass lawn. And by gosh, every morning I'd walk out and I'd cuss that stuff up and down because it would grow into my beds. And you'd have to always be weeding it out of the beds. And so if you want to work, Bermuda grass will grow here, but it'll be working you to death. And then how much do you plan to invest? Some grasses are just really expensive on the front end, like zoysia grass. It's a great grass, may be good for low input. We're testing it right now, but we don't know how it's really going to do with a lot of our winters. Some of them have cold tolerance, some of them don't, but it's very expensive to purchase. And so an investment situation there. So the grass for us is really this. And doesn't that just look amazing? I mean, that's just a gorgeous lawn. If that was my lawn, I'd be tickled. Dark green, thick. The new turf type tall fescues have very fine textured leaves, almost look like Kentucky bluegrass. They don't look like the Kentucky 31 that we knew years and years ago. And so these things have changed a bunch. And so if you haven't, I'm sure you've all looked at turf type tall fescue, but if you haven't seen these things, give them a look. They're great. All right, a few other things here we mentioned really quickly: cultural, physical, and biological approaches for IPM. We're going to be not spending time on physical and biological. Physical is hand weeding and stuff like that. If it's your yard, that's fine. You can hand weed. I do that in my yard all the time. But if you've got 40 lawns that you have to hand weed, is that possible? You're going to have a crew of 1,000 to do it. So not probably possible, but maybe cleaning mowers if you know you've been in a yard that has a bunch of weeds in it and you don't want to track those weed seeds around. So that's something that's possible. And then biological, attracting birds to an area can be helpful. But we're going to spend the rest of our time on these cultural approaches today. So irrigation. Does anybody here have control over the homeowner's irrigation system? That's what I thought. Not one. All right, so what does that mean for you? That's bad news for you. This is one of those things you're going to have to train. You have to explain, here's how you need to set it, here's how wet we need the soil. Because if they're just running that thing like crazy night after night after night, it's going to get too wet and the turf is going to struggle and they're going to point the finger at you. I watered it, it's your fault. Well, too much water is just as bad or worse than not enough water. And so overdoing it is a bad thing. And so what we really want to shoot for is this thing called field capacity. That's the situation we've got in the middle here. And on average, we want field capacity. So whatever's left in the soil after it fills up, after irrigation or after a rain, the excess is drained off. And we've got still a whole bunch of water in there, but we've got some air spaces. Roots have to have oxygen to grow. If they don't have oxygen, they're not growing. So we've got water, we've got oxygen. So the best situation here is to fill that soil up completely. The excess will drain off, and then what happens to this water that's left in the soil? It gets used. Sure, the plant takes it up, or some more will evaporate or whatever, but it's going to get used until eventually we're here. We're at the permanent wilting point, where there's a little bit of water left in the soil, but it's not available to the plant, so it doesn't matter. The plants are going to start to wilt. And so seeing a little bit of footprinting on a lawn, because that lawn is wilting, is a good thing. Wilting is okay. Once you see that wilting, then you fill it back up until we're saturated and let the whole thing go on again. And so it's something that the homeowner was actually going to have to be a little bit active on to see, if it's raining and stuff, that soil is going to stay filled a lot longer than if it's not. And so I see all the time sprinklers going on in the rain, which blows my mind, but that's another topic. And so training them. Don't overwater your soils. Try and dry them out and then turn it on and then let them dry out again. And so it may be 2 days, it may be 3 days, it may be 4 days, depending on the soil, depending on the grass. So this is what we want. We let it dry out, we fill it back up. It's called deep and infrequent irrigation. We're watering deeply, we're filling it up, but we're doing it very infrequently. And if we do this, we're going to get a situation like we have on the left here. We're going to have a deep root system, nice and dense and fibrous, growing all over everywhere. If we put out too much water, we've got our root system all up in the top there. And this is a problem with most homeowners dealing with their own irrigation systems. No oxygen in that soil, the roots can't grow. Plus, what's their motivation? They've got water right there, right? So why grow deep roots? Y'all remember Atlanta a few years ago? They had a serious drought. That whatever their water reservoir there in Georgia dried up, and the state said no more using water for washing cars, no more putting it on lawns. Even the University of Georgia athletic fields weren't allowed to put water on those fields. I mean, they were that serious of a drought. So if you've got a situation like this, where you've got a bunch of little roots up on the top, and they say no more water, what's going to happen to your plants? They're in trouble. But if you've got this situation where you've got a nice deep root system, those at least are deep enough to potentially find more water. And so if we do this deep and infrequent, we're going to have a better, healthier root system to go after water. Not enough moisture, the plant sends down roots, but it's obviously struggling there. We got wilt on top. And then light watering, we've got quite a bit of roots in the top part there, but not much below. And so again, that situation in the drought would be in trouble. So deep and infrequent, get that pounded into your head and pounded into your customers' heads. And then time of day. Most people I see are irrigating at night. So why don't you want to irrigate at night?
Too much moisture.
Too much moisture. They stay wet all night long, promotes disease.
Fungus.
So we don't want that. We want to irrigate first thing in the morning. So ideally about 6 a.m. Why not 7? Okay, the showers and the toilets flushing and all that stuff, your water pressure just tanks. You don't get good coverage of water over the lawn. But the nice thing about first thing in the morning, the sun may be coming up, but it's not intense yet. And so there's not much evaporation going on. And so you're not losing much water. What you put out is going into the yard. We don't have the disease like we talked about. We can knock dew off the leaves, or guttation water. This is water that comes up through the plant overnight, and it's full of nutrients and sugars that diseases love. But by washing this stuff off, it reduces disease pressure. So that's a good thing. No people. Usually not a big deal on lawns, but certainly parks and other places that is an issue. Nothing ticks off people more than getting hit by a sprinkler when they're not expecting it. But when it's going on first thing in the morning, there's usually not people around. And then we talked about the water pressure, usually pretty good first thing in the morning. But less wind and all of that stuff, very important to get good uniformity with the system. If you see stuff like this and you're working on that person's yard, help them out. There's no reason to be watering streets. Streets don't grow at all. And so they don't need our water. Help the customer save money with saving water, and we only have so much water, so let's not just dump it down the drains. All right, let's jump into fertilizers here real quick. All right, anybody soil testing? Nobody? Once in a while? All right, okay, a few of you. This is something, there's no reason that you can't work this into a program and sell it to your customers. We need to soil test your lawn so we can come up with a specific prescription for your area. And if you're doing a whole bunch of yards in one neighborhood and you know the soils are all the same, you don't have to do one per lawn. You could do one for the whole area. It doesn't really matter as long as it's all the same soil. But knowing what's going on in the soil is pretty important, because if we don't know what's going on in the soil, how do we know what to apply? And so if we're just slinging triple 19 because that's what we've got in the truck, is that really environmentally friendly? No, it's not. Maybe that's what the lawn needs, but maybe it's not. So phosphorus and potassium, a lot of times in Kentucky we don't need phosphorus and potassium. Our soils are fairly high in these two elements, and so if our soil test says apply them, apply them. If the soil test says don't worry about it, save your money. What about this one? I said this at a meeting last year and somebody just lost their mind. What are you talking about? That's the craziest thing I've ever heard. And is there any salespeople in the room that are going to fight me on this? There's nothing wrong with the fancy turf fertilizers, nothing wrong with them at all, other than the cost. But is there anything wrong with the ag fertilizers? The only difference really is the size of the particle. So it's bigger particle, but we're talking about tall grass on lawns, and so it's going to fall down into the canopy, not be that big of a deal. So why not buy the cheaper ag-based fertilizers to use on lawns? They work just as well. The plant can't tell the difference. Know what you're doing, how much you're putting out there, how big is the yard, and how much nitrogen or how much fertilizer am I putting out on that specific area. And then the last one there should be a no-brainer. But if you're dealing with a lot of hard surfaces, buy one of these plates if you don't have one that will stop fertilizer from slinging out onto the street, and it'll just shoot it out in front of you. Pretty simple, pretty cheap, but does a good thing. All right, really quick for fertility basics. I'm sure you all know this backwards and forwards, but I'm going to go through this really quickly anyways. What do the three numbers on the bag mean?
Nitrogen, phosphorus, and potassium.
Nitrogen, phosphorus, potassium, or potash. All right, so in that order, nitrogen, phosphorus, potassium. All right, so in this one we got 5% nitrogen, 10% phosphorus, and 5% potassium. All right, so guys like me are going to tell you you need to put out 1 pound of actual nitrogen per 1,000 square feet at any given application. What does that mean, 1 pound of actual nitrogen? Anybody have a clue? So this is something that's really important. So when you hear me say 1 pound of nitrogen, I mean 1 pound of actual nitrogen. So we've got 5% nitrogen in that bag. Only 5% of that bag is actually nitrogen. And so we take 1 pound, my recommendation, divide it by, we've got a percentage here, remember, so we get rid of that percentage and make it a decimal, divided by 0.05, and we need 20 pounds of this product to give us 1 pound of actual nitrogen. If you're only putting out 1 pound of this product, you're nowhere near where that lawn needs to be. And so, easy math, and it works for whatever number that nitrogen is. You just have to keep in mind when you put out 20 pounds of whatever's in this bag, because this is a complete fertilizer, you're putting out phosphorus and potassium. And in this case, 2 pounds of phosphorus and 1 pound of potassium. And remember, most lawns, a lot of lawns don't necessarily need those things, especially if they've been fertilized with complete fertilizers for years. So what does a lawn need? It needs nitrogen. Every lawn needs nitrogen. Not every lawn needs phosphorus and potassium. And so our nitrogen sources, urea, that's the one that I usually use for my lawn, and this is the one I recommend a lot to people because it's cheap and you get the most bang for the buck, 46% nitrogen. So if you divide that 1 by 46%, how many pounds of this product are you going to have to put out on the lawn? 2.17 or something. So you're not using a whole lot of product out of that bag to get 1 pound of actual nitrogen. Any of these complete fertilizers with N, P, and K are fine. 1919, 10-10-10, 13-13, whatever, they're fine. But again, I know I'm beating a dead horse here, but if you don't need P and K based on the soil test, why are you buying it? Why are you spending the extra money on getting these fertilizers? Most of our soils don't need iron, and so don't buy these things if you don't need them, and that's again on the soil test. And then because of our limestone-based soils in a lot of situations, we don't need lime to bring our pH up. So a lot of people put out lime applications every year. We don't necessarily need that. Nitrogen fertilizers are acidifying and will decrease pH over time, but it's one of those things. Check that soil test report every 3 to 5 years. See what the pH is. Don't just sling lime to sling it. All right, timing of year for our nitrogen applications. It's all about fall. I drive around Lexington and I see garden centers with signs up in the spring saying, now is the time to fertilize your lawn. Now is not the time to fertilize your lawn. Don't buy into that stuff. Fall is the best time to fertilize your cool season lawn in Kentucky. Spring is secondary if you miss the window in the fall to do it. But we'll talk about some of the issues with fertilizing in the spring. So the reasons we want to put out nitrogen in the fall: better winter color. If you look at 2 lawns side by side, one that got fall nitrogen, one that didn't, you can tell through the whole winter which lawn got the nitrogen. It's just darker green. The other one goes off color much worse. Less mowing in the spring. For most homeowners, that's a good thing, because usually you're baling hay in the springtime. And so, especially if you put out more nitrogen in the spring, it gets even worse. Less weeds in the summer, less heat stress in the summer, less water needed in the summer, and we have less disease problems because there's less stress on these plants. They're tougher plants by being fertilized in the fall. And this work was actually done back in the 60s by Dr. Powell when he was at Virginia Tech doing his PhD. He was the godfather of fall fertilization. And so we've known this stuff for 50 years now, and it works. All right, so spring and summer nitrogen applications. This is why I say stay away from it. All of these plants here, they are warm season plants. They're either going to germinate in the spring and grow through the summer, or they're going to wake up, they're perennials, they're going to wake up and they're going to grow starting in the spring and grow all summer. They're going to absolutely love you if you're fertilizing in the spring and the summertime. They're going to take that nitrogen and they're going to outcompete our cool season grasses. So why would we want to fertilize those things? We don't. So again, back to fertilizing in the fall. If you know the lawn has really good soils, good dark color, then we probably don't need as much fertilizer on them. If they're not being irrigated, there's not being as much nitrogen lost through the soil, we probably don't need to put out as much fertilizer. If there's no traffic, we don't need recovery, so no kids running around, no dogs or whatever, not as much fertilizer. And then if we're dealing with big churchyards or things like that that don't have to be absolutely perfect, probably a situation where we don't need to put out as much nitrogen. So I've broken this down into different levels of maintenance for fertilizing, but we can get away with one time a year if we're talking about a really low maintenance situation. So again, churchyards or something that doesn't necessarily have to be too good a looking. For most lawns, we're talking 2 times a year. So when I say two times a year, I'm talking about 2 pounds of actual nitrogen per 1,000 square feet per year. And we're going to put those down in September and November. And that for most lawns is perfect. And that's it. That's all the fertilizer they're going to get for most lawns. We can get into 3 and 4 times, but we're getting into really high maintenance lawns, like that perfect lawn situation where it's going to be glowing green, like the governor's mansion. The lawn on that, for whatever reason, needs to be perfect. I guess because of visitors and whatever, they're going to be putting out more fertilizer than just 2 pounds. But for most lawns, 2 pounds is the way to go. Slow release nitrogen. Is anybody using slow release? Nobody? Okay. So slow release is just, they obviously release slowly. You apply the fertilizer, it's not all available immediately. There's a little bit coming out at a time. So the benefits of that are you're not losing nitrogen through leaching or volatilization, which is a good thing. And you're not getting a big flush of growth because you're not getting a whole bunch of fertilizer out there at one time. So that's a good thing as well. My time is up, so I need to bolt here, folks. Bad things, more expensive. Good thing, less burn, because these are usually really low percent nitrogen. I think this one's 5% here on the right. Some may improve soils. If they're organic based, you may get better soils over time. And the nice thing about these is because they're low percentages and because they're releasing only a little bit at a time, you can actually work these things into a summer program. You're not going to be hurting those cool season lawns like you would if you put out urea in the summertime. And so you can get a little bit of green kick from using these things during the growing season. Natural organics, basically what we're talking about is poo, plain and simple. Some animal waste, or some situations like that bag on the last slide was millorganite. That's Milwaukee sewage sludge. So whatever's flushed down the toilet in Milwaukee is processed and bagged up, and we put it out on plants. But usually low analysis of nitrogen, so we're going to need a lot of it. And these things are expensive, and so because we're going to need a lot of them, you're looking at a lot of money. And that's where a lot of your expense comes out on this organic lawn care, buying these expensive fertilizers. You need microbes in the soil. Most of our soils are pretty decent in microbe levels. Soil warmers in the spring to get grass, because these are dark color, they can get the grass cranking a little bit quicker. What about disadvantages on these things? Smell. Some of them are not pleasant. Plain and simple. There's actually homeowners associations, which, don't get me started on homeowners associations, but there's homeowners associations out there that have banned organic fertilizers because of how they smell. Some of them are just horrible. All right, I will fly through the rest of this. What about this? How many people have a customer that would go for that lawn?
My lawn.
That's your lawn? That's my lawn too. Couple of you? But customers that would go for that would allow probably as much clover as there is grass? Not? What's that?
Deer plot.
Well, yeah, for a deer plot, but not for a lawn. Are we agreeing on that? Nobody would go for this? What's wrong with that? It doesn't look good. So, at some point over the last 70, 80 years, we've gotten to this mindset that one thing is all we need in a lawn, and that one thing is grass. Nothing else. We can't have violets, we can't have clover, we can't have anything else because that's bad. Is clover bad in a lawn? No, it's fantastic in a lawn. So, we're getting free nitrogen. That plant is taking nitrogen out of the atmosphere and it's releasing it into the soil for the grass to use. So, with a good stand of white clover, you can actually get 2 pounds of actual nitrogen per 1,000 square feet per year supplied to the lawn. What was my recommendation for most home lawns in Kentucky?
1 pound for 1,000 cubes.
For most lawns, 2 pounds per thousand. Do you have to fertilize at all? Not at all. And so, to me, it's a no-brainer if you can stand looking at the clover. That's the issue. So, if we never have to apply fertilizer, that's a fantastic thing. What about this? Would this be acceptable? So what's the difference? You can't see it as much. We still have it in there, but this is a new thing that's out there, microclover. We're playing with this stuff at our research farm. I can promise you, based on our lawn mowing heights that we have in Lexington, we don't have this clover that looks this small. It's bigger than this. So I think microclover is a good name for marketing, but it doesn't necessarily look just like this in the field. But if you mow the lawn low enough, then it can be a good thing. And there's what it does. No clover planted on the right, clover planted on the left. There's your free nitrogen. No fertilizer applied across there. That's a big deal. Most soccer fields in Europe are going in with microclover in them these days because of their environmental laws. They don't want to be fertilizing. All right, when do you want me to wrap up?
Yeah, would be helpful.
Okay, that's fine. Let me, you all know this stuff anyways, so it's all good. So let me wrap up with this. The best control, like I've been harping on all day, healthy turf. If you've got a stand of turf this thick, what's going to come up in it? How can it?
Grass.
Grass is it. That's it. And so our goal is to have thick, healthy turf through proper fertilization, proper mowing, proper pesticide use, all of those things. So all of those things that well, some of them we talked about, some of them we skipped over. So look at this one. We've got a stand of turf there that we have a couple of patches that died for whatever reason. Where do you see the crabgrass coming up? The vast majority of it's in those dead areas, right? So the competition's gone, that's where the weeds are coming up. So keep the lawns as good and thick as possible. You're going to have less issues with pests. All right, so you're going to have to treat. There's no doubt about it. There's still going to be insects or diseases and weeds, but know what they are. There's all of these things. If you don't know what they are, talk to your county agent. They'll help you with them. Pre-emerge herbicides. That's one thing I do recommend, even with low maintenance lawns, low input lawns, putting out a pre-emerge in the spring, because that's going to take care of most of your crabgrass and goosegrass issues throughout the year. And then if you have to put out a post-emerge application, again, the smaller they are, the easier they are to control. Once they get big and unruly, you're in trouble. All right, so reduced input, all of these things, all of these benefits for you and for your homeowners. Again, this is a program you have to sell based on these things. And again, it's still a good looking lawn, it's just not necessarily that glowing green perfect lawn. And then if you want more information about any of this stuff, we've got a lot on our webpage. We're on Facebook. We put little tidbits up there for helping you out time to time. I've got how-to videos on YouTube, how to mow properly, how to sharpen mower blades. I'm doing one about fertilizing right now. So check out all those things. We're out and about. So with that, I am 5 minutes over. I apologize, and leave her there.
This video has been part of the University of Kentucky Nursery Crops web series. For more information on the topics discussed, please contact your county extension office.